Hi everyone, welcome to Jurassic Plastic, Terrible here. Today we're going to be taking a look at this guy, the Carnegie Collection Original Diplodocus. This is one of the largest models in the Carnegie Collection line. It's certainly at least one of the heaviest. And this is really a classic model, so I thought that I would just give you a quick overview, a very brief review of this, which is the probably from about 1992 or 1993 edition of the Diplodocus. The Diplodocus was one of the original Carnegie Collection models, but it doesn't seem to have come out in 1988 like a lot of the original, the first run Carnegie Collection. It probably, this is number 410, and I believe that 410 through 416 were probably released in 1989. One of the reasons I think that is that run of Carnegie's 410 through 416 doesn't have any of the old, the dull version of the model, like the T-Rex and the Apatosaurus and the Parasaurolophus, all of which have a few real old, almost like prototype-y kind of color variants to them. This one doesn't. I personally have never encountered a Diplodocus that was anything other than this basic color pattern. So let's start with that. This color pattern, to be honest with you, was never one of my favorites from the Carnegie Collection. I think it does suit the model. It's very subdued, but so is the pose with this. The color scheme here is this kind of mustard yellow with some slightly darker brown spots and stripes all along the neck and the back and the tail, and that is pretty much it. You've got a little bit of gray on the claws, you've got a little bit of highlighting and detailing here on the head with that black color highlighting the line of the mouth and the pupil, a little bit of a brighter yellow eye here. But overall, the Diplodocus color scheme is really nothing to write home about. It's in a very posed attitude here. It's got its head turned towards you. It's got its tail kind of curled up at the end, just kind of standing there looking very regal and very stately. And not the most exciting, not exactly, if you look at the 2007 version of the Diplodocus, which was in a little bit, not really an action pose, but a little bit more of a walking pose. I think in terms of the posture, even though this one is classic, it is, I don't want to say boring. Okay, it's a little bit boring. It could be a little bit more dynamic. This is one of the only Carnegie Collection models where the tail actually is touching the ground, believe it or not. If you look even at the 1988 models, most of those have the tail clear of the ground, which was, I guess, a little bit unusual for the time period. Although if you look at the Invictas from that time period, they were starting to have elevated tails as well. The musculature on here, I think, is the most interesting thing. It's very, very bulky, but I wouldn't describe it necessarily as being overweight or just round and blob-like. It does have very well-defined muscles, kind of like the Stegosaurus has this little rhino-like overlap of the skin and musculature here on the forelimb. The hind leg muscles, the way that they kind of connect over to the tail, is actually probably pretty accurate for how bulky at least this part of the body is. I think it gives it more of a lifelike appearance than some of the more shrink-wrapped and emaciated models that you might find. The head is a little simply sculpted. You can see that it's, not very detailed. There is some skin texturing on here, but obviously not a lot of detail was put into that. There's a little bit of an indication of the ear. You can kind of see a little bit of that ridge above the orbit in the skull, giving it that little arched eyebrow appearance. The sculpting on the body is intricate. I won't say it's necessarily super detailed. You're not going to see any scales here, necessarily. There are some little rectangular patterns and wrinkles and things like that, but I think for a 140 scale model, that's probably accurate. I don't think you'd be able to discern any scales at this scale, so to speak. And, you know, this model that I have here, being from about 1993, is probably not the best example you're going to find to see the detail anyway. This is obviously late in the run. It's suffering from a lot of mold fatigue. If you even just take a look at the belly stamp on this, you can see that it's barely legible. It's been scraped out of the mold and stamped in there so many times by now. It's got these weird little cuts here. I don't know what that's from. Something at the factory when they were pulling this thing out of the mold, or what. I don't know. But even if you follow the mold lines, look at this mold line on the forefoot here. It barely lines up. These molds were getting warped. They were getting fatigued. They really had to glob the paint on and smooth these things over in order to just get them to connect in a way that would lend it some stability when it's standing. It's very heavy. It's made of soft rubber, believe it or not. I have seen samples of this in other people's collections and online that seem to be made of a harder gray plastic. Mine is obviously made of this white rubber that you can see showing through the paint rubs here, and it is very flexible. Every part of this is rubbery. You can squeeze it. You can bend the neck quite a lot without really doing any damage to the model, which is especially handy here with the tail. You can stretch it out into a straight line and it will boom, bounce right back. Older versions of this model seem to be, well, I can't tell if they're less rubbery, but they definitely do seem to have more sturdiness to them. You can see that the tail tends to stand up more in a C shape like that in some of the older models. And the other way you can tell an older model is if the brown paint scheme is a little bit darker. This is a lot more blended together. They also did re-sculpt this at least once. If you look at some of the late 90s models of the Diplodocus that are cast in color vinyl and just painted on with a yellow wash and the brown highlights, it's a lot skinnier. You can go on my website, carnegiecollection.blogspot.com, and compare the images of those with some of these earlier models, and you can tell that particularly the tail is a lot skinnier, the body has been slimmed down, the head has been retooled a little bit, and I think it overall probably looks better, although I do appreciate the classic look of this model. Those of you who follow along with appearances of dinosaur toys and models and figurines in movies will probably recognize this particular Carnegie from Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler's shelf in their trailer in Jurassic Park 1. I think there's another Carnegie in there. I think there's a T-Rex you can see at one point. This is really one of the most classic Carnegie models, and I can't say that, you know, it's one of the best in terms of anatomical accuracy. Obviously the 4 feet now we would recognize as being very, very wrong with this kind of elephant almost type foot. And the 4 feet are almost a copy of the back feet. You can see the mold fatigue, by the way. Look at this claw, which is almost blunt. This is not a break. This is painted compared to this pointier claw over here. This claw is the only claw that Diplodocus would have had on its front feet. They would have been columnar, which is pretty much correct in the updated model, which I'll talk about in a different review. The back feet also have too many claws on them. It should really just have the inner 3, these big toes, and no claws on these little puny outer toes. Obviously the tail comes out of the hip at much too low an angle. It should come out straight, which would help keep that tail clear of the ground. And the neck angle is probably a little bit too steep as well, even though modern research has shown that Diplodocid necks could reach up at a higher angle than some of those early 2000s studies suggested, where we got the walking with dinosaurs Diplodocus with just a straight horizontal neck with very little upward flexibility. I don't know if it could quite get to this degree of verticality here, but it's not as far out of the realm of possibility as they thought when they did the remade Diplodocus in 2007. Like I said, that will be the subject of a future review. The scale of this model is pretty much exactly 140. I'm not sure if the proportions necessarily are the best, but if you measure this from snout all the way along the curvature of the back to the tip of the tail, this comes out to 27 or 28 centimeters long, which based on a 28-meter animal like Diplodocus carnegii would be, that comes out to almost exactly 140, and it is a big model. Just to give you an idea of its size, here's the recent Safari Malawisaurus, which is really dwarfed by this sauropod. And here's my little 140 Marks caveman to give you the human perspective. So this is a sizable and hefty model. I've seen these things on eBay and online recently going for pretty low prices. So if you don't already have this, it really is a classic. It's worth having in your collection just because it's probably going to be one of the biggest and heftiest dinosaurs you have in your collection. So I would say that alone makes this well worth keeping your eye out for something. If you can get this for less than $20, jump on it. All in all, my take home on this model is it's a classic. It's got wonderful life to it, although it's not very dynamic. One thing Forrest Rogers is very good at is conveying a believable texture, believable bulkiness, especially to the sauropods, maybe not so much the theropods, but the classic sauropods really have a believable looking heft to them. And that combined with just the massive size of this, I think it's worthwhile to have at least some version of this Diplodocus in any collection. I don't know if I'd recommend this particular 1993 version. I think if you can find an original, look for a clean belly stamp, look for a darker color scheme, or go the other way and get the remade 1997 version, which is a little bit more slimmed down, but I think looks maybe a little bit better than this one. But the Carnegie Diplodocus, you know, it's a classic, especially if you got that Carnegie mountain, you've got to have them sitting up there. So there you have it. That's the 1993 or so Carnegie Diplodocus. And if you like this review, you want to see more short overviews, walk around type reviews like this, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and give me a comment with maybe some of the Carnegie models, different variants that you might want to see in upcoming reviews. So thanks again for watching. See you next time.